Good afternoon, I'm Rev Dave Thompson. I'd like to welcome you to our Civil Human Bible Study. I'm a civil human minister, and what that means is that I focus my ministry on building human peace and common ground. And as a civil human minister, today as I approach these scriptures, my intent is to do so with two ground rules. And the first one is that I want to help create peace by being civil. And that means respecting our shared human needs, like our need to believe our own creed and about those unanswered questions that we can't prove to one another. You know, our need to be independent from bullying and intimidation, our need to vote, our need to love somebody intimately, and our need to live our lifestyle that we want, the way we want to. And the second rule is that I want to approach as a human being, and so to create common ground that all human beings can share. So as I approach these scriptures, I'm going to try to be honest and understandable. I want to offer measurable proof if I make claims, and I only want to ask of you what is achievable without your suffering. And then last, I want to be negotiable. I want to change my opinions as I need to, as I learn and grow as a human being, and especially as we look at some of these teachings. So I'm hoping to extract the teachings out of these scriptures that I feel can be applied across the board to all human beings. I want to mention that throughout this Bible study, I would really appreciate it. If you have comments or questions, please do leave them in the comments below. During the episode, I'll be trying to watch for those comments, and that's much appreciated. And if you have comments after the show, please leave those as well. It's all about helping each other grow and to understand things better, so I really appreciate your participation. A couple of things that I want to point out is the obvious change. I've lost my deer and I've gained a beautiful elk drawing here. And Michael, thank you so much for giving me this and contributing this to the studio. It's beautiful, and I really appreciate that. And so we've changed some stuff around in the studio, and I'm really excited about that. And now moving into the Bible study, I want to give you a roadmap. So first we'll read the text, then we're going to talk about what's happened in the text up till now, and then I want to give a brief layout of the culture, some of the issues that would help us understand the culture back then and what's being said in this text, as well as a couple language issues, some translation to help you understand the words that are being used. And then last, I want to give you my paraphrase, which is my translation and take on translating this into our modern age for general human interest. And then last, just to give you a couple of walkaway points, the things that I've left with this Bible study for today. So let's go ahead and read our scripture for today. We're in Matthew chapter 10, verse 21 through 25. I'm reading from the Bible that my father gave me for graduation in high school, where he's written throughout the scriptures some notes, so it's a very personal scripture to me. Let's go ahead and begin by reading verse 21. Now brother will deliver up brother to death, and father his child, and children will rise up against parents and cause them to be put to death, and you will be hated by all for my name's sake. But he who endures to the end will be saved. But when they persecute you in this city, flee to another. For assuredly I say to you, you will not have gone through all the cities of Israel before the Son of Man comes. A disciple is not above his teacher, nor a servant above his master. It is enough for a disciple that he be like his teacher, and a servant he be like his master. They have called the master of the house Beelzebub. How much more will they call those of the household? Therefore do not fear them, for there is nothing covered that will not be revealed, and hidden that will not be known. So I would like to lay a couple of contexts here, some cultural aspects that will really help. You heard the word Beelzebub. I want to talk about what that means and what was being mentioned here. We've heard it earlier. The Pharisees, who are the leaders in the Jewish culture at the time, who are really at odds with Jesus, because Jesus is really speaking a message that detracts from their power and allows people to have a direct contact to God without having to go through all this spiritual and church and religiosity. So they don't like Jesus. They called him Beelzebub, and we're going to talk about that in a second. To give you a brief overview of what's happened up to this point, Matthew, who wrote this book to the Jewish people in the first century, he was writing to introduce Jesus and give an account of his experience. He's one of the first students of Jesus, and he gives us an introduction to who Jesus is. Then he gives us an introduction to what Jesus taught. And so we have this account of Jesus teaching. The Sermon on the Mount is called. And he lays out basically what a happy life and what a happy society look like. And those look like peacemaking, kindness, compassion, humility, self-restraint. These are the things that make a happy person and a happy society. And so Jesus recommends that we focus on those virtues as opposed to all the religious laws or the religiosity or the ritual and all that the religious leaders are trying to create and that they observe very, very well. But over here, people are suffering, and Jesus is more concerned about that because these are his virtues. So he teaches us a lot about that. And then Matthew gives us basically an introduction to who Jesus spends his time with. And it's not the politicians, it's not the people who are well off, it's not the Pharisees or the Sadducees or the Romans, it's not anybody who's in power and who's healthy. He goes first to an untouchable leper, which is somebody that you really couldn't even touch as part of being ritually clean in their faith at the time. So Jesus actually goes there first, and he goes to all the outcasts and all the people that the Jewish people despised at the time or that they marginalized. That's the kind of person that Jesus is and how he operates. And now he's got his students, he's got 12 of them at the moment, and he's sending them out in this context today and what we're talking about, sending them out to other cities without him so that they can get some experience in teaching what he has taught them about these virtues and how to have a good life. So we've talked about, in the culture of Beelzebub, I'm going to say that after I talk about this first, master and servant. This has also been translated as slave incorrectly and has been unfortunately used by people in our past to promote and to vindicate slavery, and it is really not at all what Jesus is talking about. A servant is not subservient to his master like a slave to a slave owner. In the Jewish custom of the day, it was very common for people to become servants of families who were well off. Maybe they didn't have much, and so they needed to have a job. And so these people would take them on, and it was much more substantial. They actually became more of a household member, and the person who was in charge of the family was also in charge of them. They gave up some rights of ownership and such so that they could enjoy all the benefits of masters. A lot like the children are dependent upon their parents. It was much the same way, but it was never without volition, meaning it was always voluntary. A person could never be asked to be a servant against their will. That was actually forbidden in the Old Testament and in the Jewish law of the day. But what Jesus is saying here is that, somebody who is reliant on an employer, which would be a little bit more relating what the message is here, that an employee is not greater than his employer, meaning that they're actually the same. They represent the company in the same way, different jobs, but on the same level. And in the same way, he says, the disciples and students are the same as their master and teacher. It isn't that one is above the other, but it's that they are like one another. And that's why he says, so get ready to be persecuted. That's his whole intention here. And then he says, if they've called me Beelzebub, they're going to call you Beelzebub. And I want to talk about what that term actually means. Beelzebub is actually a construct of a couple different words. It's a reference to Baal, which is an early pagan god, and the fly, Lord of the Fly. So it's almost this foreign god, or in their mind a heathen or pagan god, and a fly, which is really, in this context, keep in mind that they had, places where corpses were kept and where there would be disease and things that were rotting to the side. And what they associated the fly with was this, place of death, was a place of putrefaction. So they were calling Jesus essentially, look, he is a heathen god who is, a lord of death. And this is one of the more offensive things that they could say, one of the more the great attacks on Jesus's character, because as you and I know, especially in this day and age, that people engage in fear, uncertainty, and doubt. When they throw out accusations about somebody, it doesn't even matter if they're true. A lot of people will just blindly accept it because it scares them, because it creates fear in us. That's unfortunate, but it's also a reality, and that's what Jesus is saying here. I want to talk a little bit about the words today, and there's just a few of them that I'd like to run through. And then I'll give you my paraphrase and translation for today and some walk-away points. The first is that he mentions that brother will betray brother. And he kind of has like this setup where the family is doing terrible things to one another. And it seems a bit odd, right? So if Jesus is all about peace, if Jesus is all about love and compassion and forgiveness, these types of things, why in the world is he suggesting that people are going to be murdering each other, especially in their family? And the reason for this is this first, brother will betray brother. Betrayal really means to be handed over from a close relationship to some other person. And Matthew, I think, is giving a little foreshadowing, a little heads up that Judas, who's one of these students of Jesus, is going to betray Jesus and hand Jesus over to the politicians of the day and the religious leaders, who are basically going to have a field day with Jesus and in actuality cause him to be crucified. The point being this, that when we do good, when we are kind, when we cause chaos, the people who are relying upon the system, the people who are already in comfort, the people who make a great deal of money as a result of the way things are structured right now, do not like Jesus, do not like people, even today, who buck the system, who rock the boat, who cause people to look away from them and to just the virtues. I mean, can you imagine in this day and age, the Pharisees and Sadducees and religious leaders had this hold on the people of that day. They believed that the only way to be good was to follow all of these religious rules, and the Pharisees and these leadership relied on that. And they made all kinds of ridiculous requirements that made people exchange money so that they could use the temple currency to make offerings and buy specific animals so that they were pure. And it was ridiculous. They were making a killing off of people's desire to be good. So when Jesus calls people to forget about all that and to just focus on doing good, to being peaceful, to being compassionate, it is upsetting the system. So they are trying to do anything that they can to disrupt Jesus and his disciples. And that's why we have this really crazy accounting of a son and children raising up against their parents because they want to put them to death. And really, that's what happens. Today, we're facing very much a lot of the same things. It may not quite be to that extreme right now, but it's getting there. It's getting to a place where people are beginning to turn against each other. That is so unfortunate, and as a result, a direct result of many of our leadership, and I would say ministers and churches, who are promoting division, who are promoting isolation, instead of promoting peace, like Jesus has taught them to, instead of promoting compassion and forgiveness. Last, I want to talk about Jesus' final comment that, if a master and a student are the same, and if a master and their servant are the same, if the master is going to be harassed, it means that the servant or the student is going to be harassed as well. So he's telling them, look, there's nothing new here. This is the way it's always been because this is the way humans operate. When people persecute the leader, you should expect to be persecuted. Today, there are many people who are trying to stand up for good virtues, who are trying to stand up for what's right, and they are being persecuted. They're having lawsuits thrown against them. They're having leaders who slander them in front of everybody, call them names and make accusations without providing one shred of evidence, which ironically is actually the name of the devil. The great slanderer is actually what it translates to, Satan. That's what it means. This is this individual or this spirit who is all about falsely representing or cutting people down or speaking falsely about them. So I want to read my paraphrase today, and this is my, again, translation of this context and these scriptures into what I feel is at least the best shot at communicating these ideas to people without regard to their faith or their, the way that they operate in their lifestyle. So just to humans. Brother will hand their brother over to death and father his child. Children will raise up against their parents and will put them to death. You will be looked down upon by all kinds of people because you chose to make peace instead of war. Because you chose to be humble rather than to consider yourself better than others. You show restraint rather than destroying your enemy. You forgive rather than to exact revenge. If you hold up under this pressure, you will be rescued from them. Whenever they come after you, go somewhere else and continue your work. Trust that you won't get to every city before I catch up to you. You've seen the way that they have treated me. Be prepared for the same kind of treatment to you. So I want to leave you with just a couple walkaway points, some things that I took from this passage that hopefully will be helpful for you in our day and age of conflict. In these times of conflict, people are going to pressure us to do things that they normally don't want to do. Things are going to fall into chaos. And we should expect that people will end up being pressured to say and to do things that in any normal circumstance they wouldn't. But because things are so chaotic and because there's so much on the line and there's so much to risk, we should expect that people are going to be stretched to the limit. And when these lines are drawn, people are going to despise us. I want to share quickly, over the last 20 years, this has been a specifically complicated issue for me to face. I spent 20 years reaching across the board as a gay man to minister to conservatives to help them understand what this issue is about, to let them hear my story, to hear their story, to find common ground and to find peace. And I found that even though I was seeking after peace and compassion and these virtues that I believe Jesus teaches and that I believe are important human virtues, even though I stood for these things, there were a number of people who did not like me, who said all kinds of bad things about me because on the right, I wasn't disagreeing, I wasn't coming to their side enough, and on the left, I didn't come to their side enough. But in the middle is where we find peace. We have to be able to talk to one another in a language that we can both understand. So I just want to give you not just a warning, but an encouragement. When we do good, and when we step across the fence or the line in the sand, people aren't going to like it because they are invested in their side. But take heart. Know that you will experience these things, but if you stand and keep on it every day, you will, as Jesus says in here, be saved from it. You will be rescued from these claims because you will help make peace. And eventually, people will see the benefit of it. Eventually, people will understand what you were doing in the first place. It took me going one by one, meeting one pastor at a time, having coffee with them. For several years, it was just one pastor at a time, and it wasn't until I began to grow in people understanding my intentions and knowing that I wasn't there to drop another shoe and or for the shoe to drop and me to be like a liberal or somebody who is completely against them. It took a while, but eventually word got around that I was somebody that they could talk to in a safe place, in a place that was compassionate, in a place that would listen and that would help them get to a place where they can make some movement and can find common ground. The last thing I want to share is something that Jesus notes to his disciples. If you are persecuted in one city, flee to the next. I mean, that may seem kind of simple, and it may also seem somewhat cowardly. You would think that, well, shouldn't they just stand up against those people? But what I think he's saying here, and what I think the message is for us today, is rather than fighting the people who have no care or concern about what you want or what you're trying to accomplish, rather than spinning wheels there and talking to them, go to the people who do want to hear you. Keep moving along. I had to learn to do that. Because obviously, meeting with different pastors and different leaders and people, many would disagree with me, and many would end up persecuting me or saying bad things about me. And I had to understand that that's just what comes with the territory, and that I needed to just keep moving along. And so if you're trying to make some improvement, if you're trying to build peace or to restore a relationship, to understand that sometimes we do need to walk away from it. Sometimes that's the healthy thing, because there are many other people who do need to hear our message, who do need us in their lives. There is somebody and there are people out there who are ready to hear our message and rather ready to be moving towards peace and to these virtues that we hold most dear. I want to thank you so much for joining me today. I am so grateful that you continue to join me on this journey as I continue to read these scriptures and come to them as a human being and try to find these truths. Your comments and your reflections are so important to me, and please do reach out and message me if you'd like to, if you need to talk with somebody. My email is on my website at revdavethompson.com. You're welcome to reach out to me there, or on Facebook or WhatsApp or Twitter, and basically Instagram. Anything it's Rev Dave Thompson in most cases. So until tomorrow, when we meet again to look at these scriptures once more, I want to say to you, I love you. And I hope that you choose to love yourself. It's the only love in this world that we have any control over. And now I invite you to join me as we go about the rest of our day, loving our neighbors the same way. Thank you.